Hey everyone, welcome to my social media presentation. So today I'm here to share the history of Bandcamp, which is a music distribution service that kind of rose to prominence in the 2010s. The reason I'm talking to you about Bandcamp is because I believe that they are a company that has successfully harnessed the power of the cognitive surplus to cultivate one of the most influential underground cultures of the 2010s in America. So let's get started. In 2007, the digital music scene was an interesting one to say the least. Online sales were strong, but with the rapid shift away from CDs and the rising prominence of the download, the music industry had to kind of rely more heavily on MP3s and MP4s and services like iTunes. As Web 2.0 began to hit its full stride with the rise of websites like YouTube, which would, no one saw this coming, but inevitably replace MTV, the music industry was suddenly in a very vulnerable position. For decades past, the large music labels had controlled all parts of the process, from artist and repertoire reps to public distribution and concert scheduling. There were essentially like six big labels in the 90s. There was like Sony, there was Warner, there was Universal, and all these guys had cornered the entire market. So if you were a music artist in the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, you had to go to these guys. You had to pay them a lot of money. They'd own your entire library of music, and it was a big ripoff to all music producers everywhere. And then in 1999, everything changed. Napster wasn't the first peer-to-peer file sharing service on the internet, but it is certainly one of the most memorable. The online database of free downloadable music turned the industry on its head, because for the past 80 years, these labels had total control over the entire process. And this is something that we've seen before with every medium. Gutenberg economics. When the group of people that can make things are small, the means of production is very controlled and the investment to make things is high. And now, two guys with the same name came along and nearly toppled these monolith corporations by making the media spreadable and available to everyone. For those few years between 1999 and 2002, the people decided what they listened to. There was no longer this filtered down set of music that the corporations pushed out of their artists and what they wanted pop music to be. And the public had access to these indie artists, or independent artists, free from labels, and it's a movement that kept up its momentum all the way up until today. Fast forward now to 2008, and we're going to meet Ethan Diamond. Ethan was the co-founder of Oddpost, which is kind of like this pre-Gmail web service that was purchased by Yahoo in 2005 to boost whatever webmail they were doing. And in 2008, he was on to another crazy endeavor. It was this project called Bandcamp. Bandcamp was this unique take on the music industry that put the artists first. A weird approach because it had always been the other way around. Whereas other services like iTunes would pay the artist a small cut of the initial purchase, Bandcamp cut out the middleman completely. It was the distributor, and the artist becomes their label. It's not the artist going to the middleman to distribute, and then the label gets a cut, and then from that cut, the artist gets a minuscule amount. Suddenly, now all the artists are in charge of what they own and how they put out things, and they control their prices, they control their shipping costs, they control the price tag on things. And people loved it. And you see, without the middleman, independent artists received the larger portion of money made on the site. Sam Clearman, an interviewer who spoke with one of the lead software developers, came to the conclusion that Bandcamp understood that with the barrier to entry so low on the internet, only companies that truly put their users first will thrive in the long run. And Ethan had just stuck it to these large corporations with this model. It was something that had never been done before, and something that kind of made you wonder why any musical artist would ever go to these corporations again. And as more and more indie artists flocked to the site, Ethan began to build and cultivate a very unique culture. And he wasn't done yet. Ethan introduced the now famous pay for what you want model on the website. And even though it seemed completely counterintuitive to success and profit, Bandcamp's culture was now an intrinsically motivated, tight-knit group of people that understood paying for music isn't a requirement for good music. From there on, Ethan added a weekly editorial for Bandcamp that handpicked independent artists that submitted stuff throughout the week and just randomly promoted them, regardless if the artist had 1 listener or 100 listeners. The staff would listen to every submission and compile their favorites and release it in a newsletter-like form. And it created this culture that anyone from anywhere could make good music and get it promoted. Other websites with strong cultures like Reddit and 4chan saw what Bandcamp was doing and said, we want in on this too. And so they took artists that had released their music on Bandcamp and decided to champion them. And so they pushed these musical creatives like Car Seat Headrest or Claro into the spotlight, to the point where they're pretty much common household names today in the indie scene, let alone pop music. And this basically proved that a successful artist could bridge the barrier between the underground and pop music. In the mid-2010s, vaporwave became one of the first genres of music to completely emerge from the internet. And guess who was responsible for this? In 2019, vinyl sales had begun to become popular again. Why? No one really knows. Maybe it was the aesthetic of the way it looked, or the novelty of having your own musical frisbee. Regardless, all we know is that large music corporations of the past owned all of the vinyl pressing plants, and so there was no way that indie artists could release the music to the people probably most interested in owning vinyls. Until Ethan said, guys, you know how you wanted that whole vinyl thing? It can be yours, along with the packaging and pressing, because guess what? We now have our own in-house vinyl pressing station. In March 2020, when the COVID pandemic hit, it had shut down a lot of the world's productivity, and so what did Ethan and the Bandcamp staff decide to do? Well, they came up with Bandcamp Fridays. Every first Friday of the month, Bandcamp would take its share out of purchases and give 100% to the artists that make them. In the first 4 days of Bandcamp Fridays, the entire community put over $20 million into the pockets of artists and independent labels. So what's it all for? Why am I talking about Bandcamp? Why am I talking about all these things that they've done? What does it have to do with our class? What is Ethan Diamond doing? Is he a terrible businessman? Shouldn't he be taking more advantage of the artist just from a profit standpoint? Well, to understand what's going on, you have to look at Bandcamp's mission. Ethan Diamond has created a community that isn't in it for the money or the clout. Where other platforms like SoundCloud and YouTube will almost surely guarantee the same artist more fame, fans, and money, Bandcamp's entire mission has always been one thing. It's to create a good community that makes great music. Way back at the beginning of the year, we talked about Edward Desi's Soma experiment, where participants were asked to assemble shapes together in as many configurations as possible. Then the experiment was run a second time, and this time half the participants were paid money to find as many shapes as possible. And what they found was there was this crowding out effect that they called it, where people who were paid money and then the next time it was run without money, they did worse because the extrinsic motivator of money caused the intrinsic motivation of a challenge to go away. In a creative world like the music industry, Ethan saw that there was a community of music producers that simply wanted to be heard. It was this untapped pool of the collective cognitive surplus. A group of individuals that wanted to be connected with one another. And simply, that's it. Going back to the 3 types of revolutions that we learned about earlier in the year, Bandcamp embraces the as much chaos as we can stand model. There is so many groundbreaking things that it's done, along with other music platforms too now. Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Music even, that have shook the music industry to its very core. From a model that offers free downloads to the unique artist-centric approach, Bandcamp has found what motivates a community and a culture to indulge in making and consuming this niche music. While it's very unlikely that Bandcamp will ever be the leading place to buy and sell music, the community of music lovers is what brings people back every time. You can be sure that the users that make music do it out of love, and not for clout or adornment, but simply because they made something and they wanted to share.